Well, good morning to this beautiful Dutch summer day. I feel like the weather's finally turned on us. It's 25 degrees outside, it's sunny, there isn't a cloud in the sky, and today's made even better by this Royal Enfield Interceptor 650, which I'm riding for the next 24 hours. The reason I'm so keen to ride this bike, because as I've progressed as a motorcycle rider over the past few years, I've been riding for around 8 years now, I feel like I'm kind of done with the speed and the adrenaline of motorcycling and trying to enjoy more of the character of bikes and enjoying the scenery, just having an overall more calm experience. And that has made me look more at retro bikes. And I feel like this Royal Enfield Interceptor 650 is one of the best retro bikes you can buy right now. Even though brands like Triumph, Yamaha, Kawasaki all make modern retro bikes, I feel like those are leaning a little bit more towards the modern side of the end. And Royal Enfield is one of the last manufacturers to still make proper old school bikes. So let me show you guys around this thing and go for a ride. Right, so the Royal Enfield Interceptor 650. Appearance wise, as I mentioned before, it definitely leans a lot more into the retro side than all of the other manufacturers. This still looks like a proper old school motorcycle. And as someone who's been into modern bikes like most of their lives, that was something I had to kind of get used to, because I do find the likes of the Triumph Modern Retros look better to me, because like I said, I'm more into modern bikes. But if you're into this sort of thing, I think Royal Enfield is probably the only manufacturer who offers still something that looks like this. And to be honest, the fit and finish, this is a loaner bike from a dealer. It's, as far as I can tell, it's quite okay. I mean, the paint looks beautiful, but on like the metallic surfaces over here, you can notice some light corrosion. And as I mentioned before, it might be just because of the fact that it's a loaner bike and it's probably had quite a hard life. And maybe just a good polish is all it needs to look stunning again. But yeah, I think it looks really nice, actually. I'm just gonna come out and say it. You got the dual exhaust, which I love. Really nice long flat seat, which while riding over here has been nice and roomy. Engine sticks out a little bit, so I'll come over to this side. So when going for the rear brake, I have noticed my foot hitting the engine a little bit. And single disc on the front, Bibri, which actually felt quite nice. I got this little fly screen and got like the pannier racks on the back. So yeah, overall, really nice actually. Let me know in the comments what you guys think. Now, let's hop on, go for a ride, and I'll tell you my first impressions.
Alright, so first impression of the Royal Enfield Interceptor 650. This thing is a lot more refined than I expected to be. As soon as I jumped on, it came to my attention that this bike is actually very quiet. Because it's more of an old school engine, I expect it to be pretty bassy. But no, it sounds pretty civilized actually. So I'd be really interested to hear this bike with an aftermarket exhaust, because I've seen some videos on YouTube of this bike with different exhausts, and it sounds pretty spicy, so to say. Adding to that, the gearbox also feels really slick. Yeah, it's just a pleasure to use, I guess you could say. I haven't had any problems with like false neutrals or being in the wrong gear or anything. It's just another thing that's more refined than I expected it to be. And talking about engine characteristics, this being an 650cc parallel twin, I expected there to be like a lump of torque at the bottom. And I know it's a 47 horsepower bike, it's an A2 bike, so you can't expect too much in the power front. But the engine feels a bit more revvy than I expected it to be. Like, it does encourage you to go up and down the rev range more than I guess I figured from big thumping 2-cylinder 650. It's not a bad thing, just not what I expected, I guess. The brakes feel decently sharp. So they're a single disc Bibri caliper. and I would say it's more than plenty enough for this kind of bike. It's got a nice amount of bite to it, not too sharp, but definitely enough, decent amount of power, and it gives you confidence in stopping this bike. And I feel like you do need that confidence a little bit, because as some of you might already know, Royal Enfields aren't particularly known for being the lightest bike, and this certainly isn't either one either, because I think this is like 220 kgs. Thank you, sir. And as I was taking some shots, as you saw before, moving around the bike a bit, you can definitely tell it's not the lightest bike to push around. And while you're riding, it's definitely not too bad. You don't really notice it that much. And even around town or just maneuvering in and out of parking lots, it's definitely very maneuverable. So Royal Enfield has done a good job there disguising the weight. But yeah, when you're maneuvering the bike around at low speeds, or when you're like pushing it, you definitely do notice it. I would say this engine has a really satisfying amount of power to use. As some of you might already know, I generally am a fan of smaller capacity engines, because you get to wind the bike out, and that's definitely the case with this bike. There's a satisfying amount of torque and power on tap, so you do feel like you're making progress, but it's definitely usable, you know. It's a lot of fun to go into a corner like this and then just full throttle, rev it out a bit, and you're still kind of within the speed limit. And I feel like that's what all these retro bikes are all about, right? Just having the most amount of fun, having a really pleasurable experience while you're still adhering to the speed limit and being a legal citizen, I guess. So that's definitely one of the main things I really appreciate about this genre of bikes in general, but this bike in particular embodies that really well.
Right, so I've just pulled over for a break, and I have to say the thing I'm most impressed by thus far is just how much fun this thing is on like twisty roads. I went through some, I don't know what you would call it in English, dikes, I don't know, I guess dikes? Twisty roads here in Holland, and it gives me so much confidence. And because the engine isn't too powerful, you get to ring it out, as I always mention. That's a lot of fun. And yeah, I don't know, it's just really different than I expected. I expected this bike to be a little bit more lazy, a bit more torquey, a bit more thumpy, a bit more unrefined, I guess you could say. But so far it's been a lot sportier than I expected. So, gonna drink some water, have a few krentenbollen for those few Dutchies, and continue riding, because this bike is turning out to be a little bit different than I expected.
Okay, so now that I've been riding this Interceptor 650 for a couple of hours, I want to talk about some of the downsides I've discovered about this bike. And there's three main things that jump out to me. First thing being the seat. Although it is quite long and quite narrow, the padding is soft, but not in a good way, I would say. I rode this bike home from the dealership, which is about an hour and 15 minutes. And it was fine, but I did notice my butt starting to ache a little bit, which isn't great for what I would consider a pretty short ride. So that would definitely be one of the first things I would change about this bike if I were to buy one, is to get an aftermarket seat which is more comfortable. Second thing I noticed is when I was riding around town, I went a small part through the center of Amsterdam on the way back. I noticed that the fueling isn't exactly spot on, and although it gets better as you go up higher in the rev range, so once you're just going like this, 50, 60, 70 kilometers an hour, it's fine. But when you're riding around town, you definitely notice the initial throttle response, just the on-off throttle, being a bit jerky. And that's kind of a shame, because the rest of the bike is really excellent around town. It's really flickable, it's really easy to maneuver. The low speed stuff, like trying to keep it rolling while you're waiting for a stoplight to turn green, that's all really easy. It's a really well balanced bike, all of the controls are friendly. It's just the throttle response slowed down lets it down a little bit. Third thing I would probably immediately change if I built this bike for myself is the exhaust. As soon as I started this bike up when picking it up, I noticed it was really quiet. And I get why. I mean, the Euro regs are getting more and more strict these days. We're not allowed to have that much sound anymore out of the factory. But this being architecturally quite an old bike, yeah, I expected a bit more bark and a bit more bass. And I know these bikes can sound really great with the aftermarket exhaust. So it just feels like you're missing out on a lot of the character this engine has to offer, while where you still have the stock exhaust on. So definitely change that thing as soon as possible. Other than that, I really like this bike. I really, really like this bike.
Right, so it's the next day. The weather's gotten, yeah, not as great. I woke up with a cold this morning, but that doesn't detract from the fact that I've had an amazing time with this Interceptor 650 over the last 24 hours. It's been surprising, to say the least. I kind of expected this bike to be a little bit more raw and unrefined going in. That's something I really like about the classic bikes. But I was surprised to find out this thing is actually quite smooth, quite refined and quite sporty. And of course the few niggles like the seat, the exhaust and snatchy fueling at low speeds, I think that can all be fixed. And all of these findings make me really want to spend more time with this bike, because I feel like there's so much potential left on the table. And because it's more refined than I expected it would be, I really want to take this thing on like a Euro trip to the Alps or something. Just put on a different seat, put on some luggage on the racks this bike already has. And yeah, just go and enjoy the twisty roads, enjoy the scenery. I always used to go on like sporty bikes or adventure bikes, but I think this might be a really nice option as well. So I'm gonna have to hand this bike back in like 30 minutes or an hour or so. So I'm just gonna wrap up the video here. I really want to thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe and like the video if you enjoyed. And I'll see you in the next one. Ciao, ciao.